The alley smelled of blood and rain. A man in a torn designer suit lay curled on the cold ground, his hands shaking as boots crashed into his ribs again and again. Just hours ago, Joseph Ndlovu was shaking hands in glass offices feared and respected. Now, in this narrow Lagos backstreet, he was nothing, just another body being erased in silence. The thugs laughed. One of them raised his foot for the final blow. Then it happened. From the darkness, a barefoot, homeless girl stepped forward. Her clothes were torn, her face thin with hunger, but her eyes were steady, calm, dangerous. She lifted her fists, and the night held its breath. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. If stories of destiny, courage, and hidden strength move, you don't forget to subscribe. Joseph Ndlovu did not believe in coincidence. That belief had carried him from the dust roads of his childhood to the glass towers of Lagos Island. It was the reason he trusted numbers more than people, contracts more than promises. Life in his mind was a system, cold, logical, predictable if you were smart enough. And tonight was supposed to be predictable. The boardroom lights were still on when the meeting finally ended. Midnight had crept in unnoticed, slipping through the blinds while voices argued over logistics routes, quarterly losses, and a delayed shipment stuck at the port. Joseph sat at the head of the table, fingers interlocked, listening more than he spoke. Michael Okori leaned forward, his voice smooth. "We can't afford another delay, Joseph. Investors are already nervous." Joseph studied him. Michael had been with the company for 8 years, loyal, efficient, ambitious. Too ambitious, perhaps. "We'll handle it," Joseph said calmly. "I want a full audit of the supply chain, every signature, every approval." A flicker passed across Michael's eyes, gone in a second, but Joseph noticed. The meeting adjourned, chairs scraped back, laptops snapped shut. One by one, the executives filed out, offering polite goodnights. Joseph remained seated long after the room emptied, staring at the city lights beyond the window. 38 years old, a billionaire on paper. Yet the silence around him felt heavier than poverty ever had. His phone buzzed. A message from his sister Ruth. "You're working too late again. One day, this city will swallow you." Joseph exhaled a faint smile and typed back, "I'm fine." He wasn't. When he finally left the building, his driver had already gone home. Joseph had dismissed him earlier, craving the rare feeling of walking alone. Lagos at night was a different creature, louder, darker, more honest. The streets near the business district were still alive, horns blaring, street vendors calling out the smell of roasted corn mixing with diesel fumes. Joseph loosened his tie and walked blending into the crowd. Another tall man in a suit no one really noticed. He took a turn he shouldn't have. At first it seemed harmless, a shortcut between 2 blocks. Then the lights thinned. The noise faded. The buildings leaned closer, their walls stained with years of neglect. Joseph slowed. His instincts stirred. The same instincts that had once warned him not to trust certain partners, not to sign certain deals. He reached for his phone. Too late. Footsteps echoed behind him. "Hey, boss," a voice called out, mocking. "Lost." Joseph turned. 3 men stepped from the shadows, then a 4th. Their eyes were sharp, hungry. Babatunde Tunde Ajayi moved to the front, rolling his shoulders like a man warming up for sport. Joseph straightened. I don't want trouble. Tunde laughed. Nobody ever does. What followed was chaos fists, pain the sickening crack of bone against flesh. Joseph fought back, fueled by panic and pride, but he was outnumbered. A blow to the back of his head sent the world spinning. He fell. Boots rained down. The city did not care. Hours earlier, on the other side of Lagos, Deborah Akinwale was counting her blessings in silence. She sat beneath the overhang of a closed electronics shop, her back against cold metal shutters. Her entire world fit inside a torn backpack, 2 shirts, a bottle of water, and a pair of worn-out hand wraps she never let anyone see. She had learned long ago that weakness invited cruelty. Mama Falake's food stall was closing when Deborah arrived. You're late, child, the old woman scolded gently, handing her a small bowl of rice. I saved this. Thank you, Mama Deborah said softly. Mama Falake studied her face the way mothers do, seeing hunger, yes, but also something else, something coiled and watchful. You shouldn't be sleeping on the streets, Mama Falake sighed. A girl like you? Deborah lowered her eyes. The streets are quieter than homes. Mama Falake didn't push. She never did. Later, Deborah walked alone, barefoot, on warm concrete, her senses tuned to the night. Hunger sharpened awareness. So did memory. She heard it before she saw it, the laughter. The sound of cruelty carried easily in dark places. Deborah stopped. Down the narrow alley ahead, shadows moved violently. A man's grunt cut through the air. Another laugh followed. Deborah's body reacted before her mind did. She crouched behind a dumpster, peering into the alley. 4 men, one on the ground. Blood glistened under a flickering streetlight. The man wore a suit. Deborah's first instinct was to leave. Survival meant invisibility. Interference meant danger. But then she saw his face when a boot struck his ribs, not anger, not defiance. Fear. Raw, human fear. Something inside her cracked. She touched the wraps in her bag, fingers trembling. Memories surged, dusty floors, shouted commands, pain disguised as discipline, strength forged in cruelty. I'm not that person anymore, she whispered to herself. Yet her feet moved forward. Joseph barely felt the rain when it started. His world had narrowed to pain and darkness. A foot pressed against his chest. Finish him, someone said. Then everything changed. A voice female calm cut through the chaos. Step away. The men turned, startled. Joseph forced his eyes open just in time to see a slim silhouette emerge from the darkness. A homeless girl, barefoot, fragile-looking. Tunde sneered. Go home, little girl. She didn't respond. She raised her fists, and in that instant, Joseph understood something he never had before. Power did not always wear suits. Deborah Akinwale stood barefoot on the wet concrete rain, sliding down her arms like cold warnings. The alley had gone quiet, too quiet. 4 grown men stared at her, stunned for half a second by the absurdity of it all. A homeless girl, thin, alone, standing between them and their prey. Tunde recovered first. He laughed, slow and cruel. Are you mad? He asked. Do you know where you are? Deborah didn't answer. She adjusted her stance, small movement precise. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. Anyone who understood violence would have noticed the shift immediately. But these men didn't. Joseph lay on his side, vision-blurred rain stinging the cuts on his face. Through the haze he saw her clearly now. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't pleading. She looked ready. "Last warning," Tundi said, stepping closer. "Run." Deborah's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Leave him." That was all. Sola scoffed and lunged confident, careless. He never saw the kick coming. Deborah moved like a released spring. Her foot snapped upward, striking Sola's knee at an angle no joint should bend. The crack echoed off the alley walls. He screamed and collapsed. For half a heartbeat, the world froze. Then chaos exploded. One man rushed her from the side. Deborah pivoted, grabbed his wrist, twisted. Bones shifted. Pain bloomed. She used his momentum, slamming his head into the wall. He slid down unconscious before he hit the ground. Joseph's heart hammered, not just from fear, but disbelief. The third thug hesitated. That hesitation cost him. Deborah closed the distance in 2 steps, elbow driving into his throat. He dropped, gasping, clawing at air. Only Tunda remained. His smile was gone now. "Who taught you that?" he snarled. Deborah's eyes flickered, not with pride, but something darker, older. "Someone who hurt me," she said. Tunde charged, rage replacing reason. He was stronger, heavier. He grabbed her coat, trying to slam her against the wall. Deborah absorbed the impact, twisted, and drove her knee into his ribs. Once. Twice. Still, he fought. Rain slicked the ground beneath them. Deborah slipped. For the first time, fear flashed across her face. Tunde raised his fist. Joseph tried to shout. Nothing came out. Deborah rolled, grabbed a broken piece of wood from the ground and struck upward with everything she had. The wood shattered against Tunde's jaw. He stumbled back, crashed into trash bags, and didn't get up again. Silence returned. Deborah stood there, chest-heaving, hands trembling now that the danger had passed. She looked down at the men scattered around her, then at Joseph. He was barely conscious. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Stay with me." Joseph tried to focus on her face. Rainwater mixed with blood ran down his temple. "You didn't have to," he whispered. "Yes," she said. "I did." Sirens wailed somewhere far away. Deborah stiffened. She grabbed Joseph under the arms, straining to lift him. He was heavier than he looked. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear, before police arrived. A homeless girl found standing over 4 injured men would not be seen as a hero. But leaving him meant death. She dragged him out of the alley step by painful step toward the main road. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Deborah sat rigid in a plastic chair, damp clothes clinging to her skin, eyes fixed on the swinging doors of the emergency room. Nurses whispered as they passed, their glances sharp with suspicion. "Who brought him in?" one asked. "She did," another replied, lowering her voice. "From the street." Deborah pretended not to hear. After what felt like hours, a man in a white coat approached her. Dr. Samuel Adekunle, tall, tired-eyed, but kind. "He'll live," the doctor said. Deborah's shoulders sagged in relief before she could stop herself. "You saved him, doctor," Adekunle continued. "Multiple fractures, internal bleeding. If you'd come any later—" He let the sentence fade. "Can I see him?" Deborah asked. The doctor hesitated. "Just a minute." Joseph was pale beneath the hospital lights, bandages wrapped around his head and chest. Machines beeped steadily beside him. Deborah stood at the foot of the bed, suddenly unsure of where to put her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For the pain?" Joseph's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he seemed confused. Then recognition dawned. "You stayed," he said hoarsely. "Yes." "Why?" Deborah swallowed. "Because I know what it's like when no one does." He studied her face, the faint scars near her knuckles, the way she stood alert even here. "What's your name?" he asked. "Deborah." "Joseph," he replied. "Thank you." She nodded once, then stepped back as a nurse entered. Outside the room, Deborah leaned against the wall, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Her hands shook violently now. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only memory. She closed her eyes. Years ago, Deborah had been a different child, a smaller one, quieter, living inside a compound where strength was the only language spoken. Training wasn't a choice, it was survival. Mistakes were punished. Tears were forbidden. She learned to strike before she learned to trust. And when she finally ran, she ran far. Into the streets, into hunger, into invisibility. She had promised herself never to use those skills again. Tonight had broken that promise. Joseph slept unaware that the girl who saved him carried wounds deeper than his own. And somewhere in Lagos, Babatunde Ajayi was waking up in pain, his humiliation burning hotter than his injuries. This story was far from over. Morning crept into the hospital in thin gray lines. Joseph Ndlovu woke slowly, pain blooming in waves across his ribs and head. Every breath felt measured, borrowed. The steady beeping beside him anchored him to reality. For a moment, he wondered if the alley had been a dream, until he tried to move, and the memory answered sharply. A nurse noticed his eyes open and moved closer. "Easy," she said. "You're safe." Safe. The word felt strange in his mouth. "Where?" Joseph began. "General Hospital Lagos," she replied. "You were attacked. Lucky thing someone brought you in when they did. Someone." Joseph turned his head slightly, scanning the room. Deborah was not there. Disappointment surprised him. He barely knew her. Yet in his fractured memory, her calm eyes had been the last thing holding the world together. "She's gone," the nurse added, reading his expression. "The girl. She didn't want trouble." Joseph closed his eyes. He understood that instinct well. Deborah walked fast, keeping her head down as the city woke around her. Buses roared past. Vendors shouted morning prices. Life resumed its rhythm, indifferent to what had happened in a dark alley hours before. Her clothes were still damp. Her muscles ached. Inside her chest, something tight refused to loosen. She replayed the fight again and again. The sound of bones, the scream, the look on Joseph's face when he realized he was not alone. "You should have walked away," she muttered. "That was the rule of the streets. Help only when it didn't cost you survival." She stopped near a bridge, staring down at the brown water below. For a fleeting second, she imagined letting everything go past, present the constant running. Then Mama Falake's voice echoed in her mind. "You're still human, Deborah. Don't forget that." Deborah adjusted her bag and kept moving. 2 days later, Joseph sat upright for the first time. Ruth Ndlovu stood at the foot of his bed, arms crossed, eyes sharp with worry, masked as irritation. "You scared me," she said. Joseph smiled weakly. "Good to know." Her gaze softened for a second. "Who did this?" Joseph hesitated. "I'm not sure. That's not like you." He met her eyes. "That's what worries me." Ruth sighed. The police asked questions. "Inspector Ibrahim Musa will be back." Joseph nodded. He expected as much. "What about the girl?" he asked casually, as if it didn't matter. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "What girl?" "The one who brought me in." They couldn't find her. No records, no ID. Joseph looked away, frustration tightening his jaw. A girl capable of taking down 4 men did not vanish by accident. "She saved my life," he said quietly. Ruth studied him. "Then you owe her." Joseph already knew that. Inspector Musa arrived that afternoon, a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes and a voice that carried authority without aggression. "This wasn't random," Musa said, flipping through his notes. "The attackers knew where you would be. They waited." Joseph exhaled slowly. "I suspected that." Musa leaned closer. "You have enemies, Mr. Ndlovu, powerful ones." Joseph's mind drifted to Michael Okori. The hesitation, the flicker of unease during the meeting. "I want this handled discreetly," Joseph said. Musa nodded. "And the girl?" Joseph paused. "Find her, not as a suspect. As what then? As the only witness who didn't lie." That night, Deborah slept lightly beneath an abandoned awning near the market. Every sound pulled her halfway awake. Old habits never died. Footsteps approached. She was on her feet instantly, stance set. "Easy," a familiar voice said. Mama Falake emerged from the shadows holding a small bag of food. "You'll break my bones if you keep jumping like that." Deborah relaxed slightly. "Sorry, Mama." The old woman studied her closely. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." Mama Falake snorted. "You always say that." They sat together in silence, sharing food. "People are talking," Mama Falake said eventually. "About a fight in an alley. About a girl." Deborah's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean for—" "I know," Mama Falake interrupted gently. "But the world has a way of finding what hides." Deborah stared at her hands. "I don't want to be found." Mama Falake reached over, squeezing her fingers. "Then you must be careful. Powerful men don't like unanswered questions." Joseph was discharged 3 days later. He returned to his penthouse overlooking the lagoon, surrounded by glass and quiet. Everything was clean, controlled, yet the space felt wrong, too empty. He couldn't stop thinking about Deborah, about the way she had stood between him and death, without hesitation. About the sadness in her voice when she said she knew what it meant to be abandoned. Find her, he told his private security team. No police pressure, no threats. Days passed. Michael Okori visited with reports and reassurances, his concern perfectly rehearsed. Joseph listened, nodded, smiled, while something cold settled in his gut. At night, Joseph dreamed of rain and bare feet on concrete. Deborah sensed it before she saw it. A black SUV slowed near the edge of the market. Too clean, too deliberate. She slipped into the crowd, heart pounding. But the vehicle didn't follow. Instead, a woman stepped out, well-dressed, confident. Ruth Ndlovu. She scanned the crowd, eyes sharp, then met Deborah's gaze. Recognition flashed. Ruth approached calmly. "You don't have to run," she said. "We're not here to hurt you." Deborah's muscles coiled. "Then why are you here?" "Because my brother is alive, because of you." Deborah hesitated. Ruth lowered her voice. He wants to thank you. Deborah shook her head. No, he won't force you. Deborah laughed bitterly. Men like him always do. Ruth studied her for a long moment, then proved him different. The choice hung heavy between them. Deborah looked at the city she knew too well, the corners that had fed her and nearly killed her. Then she thought of the man who had looked at her not with fear or greed, but gratitude. Just once, Deborah said. Then I'm gone. Ruth nodded. That's all he asked. As Deborah stepped toward the waiting car, fate shifted again, quietly, irreversibly. The car ride was silent. Deborah sat stiffly in the back seat of the SUV, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The leather beneath her felt foreign, almost hostile. Every turn of the road pulled her farther from the world she knew, and closer to one she had learned not to trust. Ruth Ndlovu watched her from the corner of her eye. You can tell the driver to stop at any point, she said calmly. No one will touch you. Deborah didn't respond. Promises were easy when you had power. The gates of the estate opened slowly, revealing manicured lawns, bright lights, and a building that looked more like a fortress than a home. Deborah swallowed hard. She had passed places like this before barefoot and invisible, never imagining she would be invited inside. Joseph was waiting in the living room when they entered. He stood up too quickly, wincing as pain shot through his side. Deborah noticed immediately. Old instincts. Injuries spoke loudly to her. You shouldn't move like that, she said, before she could stop herself. Joseph blinked, surprised, and then smiled. I was thinking the same thing about you, he replied gently. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Ruth cleared her throat. I'll give you two some space. She paused at the door, looking pointedly at her brother. Be decent. Joseph nodded. When they were alone, Deborah shifted her weight, ready to bolt. I didn't come for thanks, she said quickly. Or money. I know, Joseph replied. That's why I wanted to see you. She frowned. Then why Joseph took a breath, choosing his words carefully. Because you saved my life when you didn't have to. And I don't know how to live with that without at least understanding who you are. Deborah laughed softly without humor. Who I am doesn't matter. It matters to me, he said. Her eyes hardened. You don't even know me. You're right, Joseph admitted. But I know this, you could have walked away. Everyone else did. That landed. Deborah looked away, her gaze drifting over the polished floors, the art on the walls. This world, she said quietly, it doesn't belong to people like me. Joseph stepped closer, but not too close. It doesn't belong to anyone, he said. We just pretend it does. She studied his face, searching for mockery. Finding none unsettled her more. Why were they after you? Deborah asked. Joseph hesitated, then slowly, because I trusted the wrong people. Deborah nodded once. That happens. Later that night, Deborah stood alone in the guest bathroom staring at her reflection. The mirror showed someone she barely recognized, cleaned up, wrapped in borrowed clothes, hair still damp from a shower she hadn't known she needed. She pressed her palms against the sink, grounding herself. This is temporary, she whispered. Don't forget that. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Deborah Joseph's voice. May I? She opened the door cautiously. There's a room ready for you, he said. You can leave whenever you want. No locks. She studied him. You expect me to trust you? No, Joseph replied. I expect you not to be afraid. She almost laughed at that. Almost. Across the city, Babatunde Ajayi paced his cramped apartment, fury burning through the pain in his ribs. His jaw was wired shut. His pride was shattered. A girl he spat through clenched teeth. A homeless girl. Sola sat nearby, nursing his injured leg. She wasn't normal Tunde. No one asked you. Tunde snapped. He stopped pacing, eyes narrowing. That man she saved, he's not just any man. Sola swallowed. You think he'll come after us? Tunde smiled darkly. No, I'll come after him. The next morning, Deborah woke to sunlight streaming through tall windows. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Then memory returned. She dressed quickly, heart pounding, ready to flee if needed. But when she stepped into the kitchen, the smell of food stopped her short. Joseph stood by the counter, clumsily stirring something in a pan, his movements stiff with pain. You're cooking? Deborah asked incredulously. I'm trying, he said. The doctor said I should rest. I ignored him. She shook her head. You're terrible at listening, so I've been told. She surprised herself by smiling. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I won't stay long, Deborah said eventually. I know, Joseph replied. But while you're here, let me help you. No, she said immediately. I don't want your money. I wasn't offering money, he said. I was offering safety. Her fork paused midair. Joseph continued carefully. Someone attacked me for a reason, and you were there. That puts you in danger. Deborah's jaw tightened. I've always been in danger. Then let me share it, he said. Just for now. She met his gaze. Saw sincerity. Saw something else, too loneliness, sharp and familiar. I don't belong here, she whispered. Joseph shook his head. Neither do I. Inspector Musa called later that day. There's movement, Musa said. Your attackers are getting nervous. Joseph glanced at Deborah across the room. So am I. Stay alert, Musa warned. And Joseph. Whoever that girl is, protect her. Joseph ended the call, his expression grave. Deborah crossed her arms. What aren't you saying? Joseph exhaled. They might come back. Her eyes sharpened instantly. Fear vanished, replaced by readiness. Then they'll regret it. Joseph watched her understanding dawning fully now. Deborah Akinwale wasn't just a girl who knew how to fight. She was someone forged by pain, and she was about to be tested again. The first sign that danger was closing in came quietly. Joseph noticed it in the way his security feeds lagged for half a second longer than usual, in the way his phone lost signal for a heartbeat, then returned. Systems rarely failed without reason. People did. He said nothing at first. Deborah, however, felt it in her bones. She stood by the window, overlooking the lagoon, eyes narrowed, shoulders tense. Someone's watching, she said. Joseph looked up from his tablet. What makes you think that? She didn't turn. The city's too quiet. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he remembered how she had said the same thing in the alley seconds before violence exploded. He set the tablet down. I'll increase security. That won't stop them, Deborah replied. It will just slow them down. Joseph studied her profile. The girl who had once blended into shadows now stood framed by glass and sunlight, still alert, still guarded. What would stop them? He asked. Deborah was silent for a long moment. Then softly, knowing they can't win. Inspector Ibrahim Musa arrived that evening. his presence grounding the house with a sense of order. He listened carefully as Joseph described the irregularities, his jaw tightening. "You were right," Musa said. Babatunde Ajayi didn't act alone. Joseph leaned forward. "Michael Okorie, Musa didn't deny it. We're building a case, but men like him don't panic easily. When they do, they lash out." Deborah crossed her arms. "So we're bait." Musa met her gaze. "Whether you like it or not." Joseph frowned. "I won't use her as bait." Musa sighed. "You already did the moment you survived." That night, Deborah couldn't sleep. She paced the guest room, the softness of the carpet irritating her bare feet. Too quiet. Too safe. Safety was unfamiliar. It dulled the senses. Her thoughts drifted back to the compound, to the endless drills, to the voice that told her pain was proof of strength. She had sworn never to need strength again. A knock came at the door. Joseph stood there holding 2 mugs. "Tea," he said. "I couldn't sleep either." She hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them charged but calm. "Why did you really stay?" Joseph asked suddenly. Deborah stared into her mug. "Because if I didn't, I'd see your face every night." He absorbed that quietly. "And you?" she asked. "Why did you bring me here?" Joseph considered. "Because when you stood in front of those men, you reminded me of who I used to be." She looked up. I wasn't always powerful," he said. "I was just stubborn enough not to die." Their eyes met. Understanding flickered. Across the city, Babatunde Ajayi received a message. "He's hiding her." Tunde's lips curled into a slow smile. Pain throbbed through his jaw, but hatred burned hotter. "Good," he muttered. "Let them feel safe." Michael Okorie stood in the shadows of the room, hands clasped behind his back. "This is getting messy," he said. Tunde turned. "You started it." Michael's eyes were cold. "And I intend to finish it." The attack came at dawn. Deborah was awake before the alarm screamed. She moved instantly, pulling Joseph out of bed as glass shattered below. "Basement," she ordered. Joseph didn't argue. They moved fast, Joseph wincing with each step, Deborah steadying him, senses flaring. Shouts echoed. Footsteps thundered. Security clashed with intruders. Then smoke filled the stairwell. Deborah cursed under her breath. She pushed Joseph into the panic room and sealed the door, her hands flying over controls she shouldn't have known but did. "Stay," she said. Joseph grabbed her wrist. "Don't." She met his gaze fierce and calm. "I'll be back." Before he could stop her, she was gone. Deborah moved through the chaos like memory itself, ducking, striking, disabling without hesitation. She wasn't fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for choice. Tunde emerged from the smoke eyes wild. "Thought you could hide," he growled. Deborah squared her shoulders. "I'm done running." Their clash was brutal. No theatrics. Just raw violence and will. She took a hit, gave one back harder. Security closed in. Sirens wailed. Tunde tried to flee. Deborah didn't let him. She brought him down with a final decisive strike, then stepped back as police flooded the grounds. Inspector Musa moved in swiftly, cuffs snapping shut around Tunde's wrists. "It's over," Musa said. Deborah wasn't so sure. By the time Joseph emerged pale, but standing, the sun was rising. He found Deborah sitting on the steps, blood on her knuckles, eyes distant. "It's done," he said. She shook her head. "Nothing like this is ever done." He sat beside her, careful of his injuries. "You saved me again." She finally looked at him. "This time, I chose to." Police led Michael Okori past them, his mask of confidence shattered. His eyes met Joseph's pleading, then bitter. Joseph felt no satisfaction, only clarity. Later, as the house settled back into silence, Deborah stood at the gate, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "I'm leaving," she said. Joseph's chest tightened. "You don't have to." "Yes," she replied gently. "I do." He nodded, respecting the truth, even as it hurt. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Deborah paused, then reached out, pressing the old hand wraps into his palm. "Keep these," she said, "so you remember, strength isn't what you own, it's what you protect." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the morning crowd. Joseph watched until she was gone. He didn't know when he would see her again, but he knew this nothing in his life would ever be the same. Lago swallowed Deborah fast. By the time Joseph recovered enough to follow the streets, had already reshuffled her like a card in a gambler's hand there, one moment gone the next. Traffic roared. People moved. Lives collided and separated without ceremony. Joseph stood in the driveway long after she vanished, the worn hand wraps still warm in his palm. They smelled faintly of soap and rain, of a life that didn't belong in his polished world. Ruth came up behind him. "She's doing what she knows," she said quietly. Joseph didn't turn. "Running. Surviving," Ruth corrected. He finally looked at her. "Find her." Ruth sighed. "Joseph, I'm not asking to control her," he said. I need to know she's safe." Ruth searched his face, then nodded slowly. "I'll try." 3 days passed. Joseph returned to work, but the office felt different now, less like a kingdom and more like a cage. Every handshake seemed fake. Every smile looked practiced. He watched his employees with new eyes, hearing Musa's words in the back of his mind. "Men like Okorie don't panic easily." Michael Okorie was in custody, but his influence still hung in the corridors like smoke. Joseph called Inspector Musa daily. Any word Joseph asked. Deborah Musa sighed. "She's not easy to trace. No documents, no address. That's the point of disappearing." Joseph clenched his jaw. "What about her safety?" Musa's voice softened a fraction. "She's smarter than most men I arrest. But the city is still dangerous." Joseph ended the call and stared at the skyline. He had spent years building systems to protect his wealth, and yet he couldn't protect the one person who had saved his life without asking anything in return. Deborah slept behind a closed mechanic shop near Mushin, a place where the owner looked away as long as she didn't cause trouble. She woke before dawn, washed at a public tap, and moved through the city like a shadow. She avoided familiar corners, avoided Mama Faleka's stall, though the ache of hunger made it hard. The attack at Joseph's estate had been too close, too loud. It reminded her how quickly safety could become a trap. She told herself she didn't miss him. But at night, when traffic quieted and the air cooled, she remembered Joseph's eyes when he said, "Neither do I belong here." It haunted her because it sounded like truth. On the 4th night after leaving, Deborah made a mistake. Hunger pushed her toward the market. Her stomach twisted, and pride became a luxury she couldn't afford. She told herself she would slip in, buy the cheapest bread, and leave. The second she stepped into the narrow lane, Near Mama Falake's stall, she felt it. A shift. Too many men. Too still. Too focused. Deborah turned immediately, but two figures blocked her path. One grabbed her arm. Her body reacted before fear could form. She twisted, elbowed broke the grip, and stepped back into stance. A man stepped forward, taller than the others, wearing a hoodie despite the heat. He smiled like someone amused. "So it's true," he said. "The little street girl fights like a soldier." Deborah's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" He shrugged. "Call me Kalichi. I'm just curious." Behind him, Mama Falak appeared, her face pale. "Deborah!" she whispered urgently. "Run." Deborah didn't. Kalichi's smile widened. "Your friend Babatunde Ajayi is gone. Prison food chain sounds not enjoyable." He clicked his tongue. But he had friends, and friends don't like being embarrassed. Deborah's blood turned cold. "How did you find me?" she demanded. Kalichi tapped his head. "Lagos is full of eyes. And you, Deborah Akinwale, you're a story now." Deborah's fingers curled. "Get out of my way." Kalichi held up his hands. "Relax. I'm not here to fight you." His eyes slid toward Mama Faleke. "I'm here to talk." Deborah glanced at the old woman. Mama Falake's hands trembled as she clutched her apron. A threat without words. Deborah swallowed hard. "What do you want?" Kalichi leaned closer. "The billionaire, Joseph Ndlovu. He ruined a lot of plans. Some powerful men want him to suffer properly." His voice lowered. "You're the key." Deborah's chest tightened. "I'm nothing." Kalechi chuckled. "To him you're not." He nodded toward his men. "We'll take you. You'll send him a message. He'll come. Simple." Deborah's eyes flashed. "Try it." The men moved at once. Deborah struck first clean, brutal, efficient. A kick to the knee. A palm strike to the throat. A sweep that sent one crashing to the ground. But there were too many. And they weren't careless, like Tunde's boys. They moved like men trained to restrain, not brawl. A cloth came toward her face, chemical sharp. Deborah twisted away, breath held. Another grabbed her from behind. Deborah slammed her head back, felt cartilage crunch, but the arms tightened. Mama Falake screamed. Deborah's eyes darted desperately, mind racing. Then a voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Get your hands off her!" The crowd parted. Joseph Ndlovu stepped forward, flanked by two security men and Inspector Musa. Deborah's heart jolted. Shock froze her for half a second, long enough for the man behind her to loosen his grip in disbelief. Joseph's eyes locked on Deborah's. Not pity, not ownership, just fierce determination. "You shouldn't be here," Deborah whispered, though she wasn't sure if he heard. Joseph didn't take his gaze off the men. "And you shouldn't be touched." Inspector Musa raised his weapon. "Everyone down, now." Kalichi's smile faltered. He said slowly, studying Joseph. "The hero arrives." Joseph's voice was low, controlled. "Who sent you?" Kalichi shrugged. "A man like you has many enemies." Musa stepped forward. "Enough. On the ground." Kalichi hesitated, then did something unexpected. He tossed a small device to the ground. A flash. Smoke exploded outward, blinding and choking. Chaos returned. Deborah coughed, eyes burning. Instinct took over. She grabbed Mama Falake's hand and pulled her backward. Joseph shouted her name. "Deborah?" She turned, searching through smoke. A hand grabbed her wrist, Joseph's. He pulled her close, shielding her with his body as they pushed through the crowd. His security formed a barrier. Musa's voice roared orders muffled by the smoke. When they finally reached the SUV, Deborah was trembling, not from fear, but fury. Joseph slammed the door, breathing hard. He looked at her eyes, dark. "I found you," he said. Deborah's voice cracked. Why? Joseph swallowed the words heavy. "Because I couldn't sleep knowing you were alone in a city that wants to swallow you." Deborah stared at him, anger and gratitude colliding violently in her chest. She hated that he was right, and she hated even more that for the first time in years she didn't want to run. The SUV cut through traffic like a blade horn blasts, scattering before it. Inside, silence pressed hard against the windows. Deborah sat, rigid arms wrapped around herself, eyes fixed on the city rushing past. Joseph sat opposite, her posture, tense jaw set, his knuckles still white from gripping the door handle moments earlier. The smell of smoke clung to their clothes, a reminder that danger did not politely end when doors closed. Inspector Musa's voice crackled over the radio from the front seat. "We lost Kelechi in the confusion," he said. "But he won't disappear for long. Men like him enjoy being seen." Joseph leaned forward. "And Mama Faleki?" "She's safe," Musa replied. "We've placed officers nearby." Deborah exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The image of the old woman's terrified face replayed in her mind, sharp and unforgiving. The SUV slowed as it approached Joseph's estate. Deborah stiffened again. "I can't stay," she said quietly. Joseph met her eyes. "You can." "No," she insisted. "Every place I touch becomes a target." Joseph's voice softened but did not weaken. "Then we'll make this place harder to touch." She looked away. "You don't understand." "I'm trying," he said. "Let me." They entered the house without ceremony. Security doubled, doors sealed, cameras recalibrated. The illusion of safety was rebuilt brick by brick. Deborah paced the living room like a caged animal. "They're not done," she said. "Kelechi wasn't here for me. He was measuring you." Joseph nodded. "And now he knows I'll show up." "Exactly," she snapped. "You walked into his plan." Joseph absorbed the blow without flinching. "Then we changed the plan." That night, Joseph convened a quiet meeting in the study. Ruth joined them, her expression tight. Inspector Musa stood near the door, arms crossed. "Kelechi works for someone," Musa said. "Not Babatunde. Higher up." Ruth frowned. "Who?" Musa hesitated. "We don't know yet." But the message was clear. Use Deborah to reach Joseph. Deborah folded her arms. "Then use me first." Joseph turned sharply. "No." Deborah met his gaze unblinking. "I'm not a hostage. I'm leverage." Joseph's voice rose. "You're a person." "So am I," she shot back. "And I won't let Mama Falek or anyone else pay for my shadow." Silence fell. Ruth spoke carefully. "What are you suggesting?" Deborah inhaled. "I disappear again. Properly. They follow me. You track them." Joseph shook his head. "That's not a plan. That's a sacrifice." Deborah's jaw tightened. "That's my choice." Joseph stood. "Not alone." Musa cleared his throat. "There may be a middle ground." They turned to him. "Bait doesn't have to be helpless," Musa continued. "And traps don't have to be obvious." Joseph's eyes narrowed. "Explain." By morning, the plan was set. Deborah would move publicly, visibly, but never alone. Joseph would be seen stepping back, resuming business, projecting normalcy. Musa's team would shadow the city's pressure points. And Ruth would pull every financial string she could find, tracing the money that fed Kelechi's network. Deborah hated it. She agreed anyway. They dressed her in ordinary clothes, nothing expensive, nothing memorable. Joseph insisted on one thing, a discreet earpiece barely visible. I don't need, Deborah began. I do, he interrupted. Humor me. She rolled her eyes, but let him fit it gently behind her ear. Their hands brushed, both stilled. Promise me, he said quietly. She searched his face, saw the fear he refused to name. I promise, she said. I'll talk. She didn't promise to run. The market buzzed under the midday sun. Deborah moved through it with practiced ease, senses alive. She felt eyes on her, some curious, some calculating. Nothing yet. Musa murmured through the earpiece. Deborah stopped at a stall, pretending to inspect fruit. A reflection caught her eye in a cracked mirror, a man lingering too long, pretending to be on his phone. I've got one, she said softly. Joseph's voice came through next tight. Describe. Tall, gray cap, scar on the cheek, Copy Musa said. Do not engage. Deborah walked on. 2 blocks later, the man followed. Then another joined him. Deborah turned down a narrower street. Heart steady, breath slow. Deborah, Joseph warned. That's enough. Almost, she replied. A hand brushed her elbow. Easy, a voice murmured. We just want to talk. She stopped, letting them encircle her. About what? About loyalty, the man with the scar said, and choices. She smiled faintly. I've made mine. The air shifted. From the rooftops, Musa's team moved. Sirens wailed in the distance, closer than before. The men cursed and scattered. Now, Joseph said. Deborah ran not away, but toward the sound of safety. She burst into a crowd as officers closed in. One man was tackled. Another vaulted a fence and vanished. Deborah doubled over, hands on knees, heart pounding. You okay? Joseph asked. Fine, she said. But they're testing us. And Joseph pressed. And they'll escalate. They did. That evening, Ruth slammed a folder onto the table. Found something. Joseph and Deborah leaned in. Shell companies. Ruth continued, routing money through construction permits and private security contracts. The name at the center keeps appearing. Joseph read it once, then again. His face hardened. I know him, he said. We competed for a port contract years ago. He lost. Musa nodded. And men like that don't forgive. Deborah looked from one to the other. So what now? Joseph closed the folder. Now we stop reacting. He turned to Deborah. And you stop disappearing. Her brow furrowed. That's your plan. It's ours, he corrected. You're not bait. You're the line they can't cross. She studied him wary. What does that mean? It means we draw them into the light, Joseph said. Publicly, legally, where they can't hide behind shadows and knives. Ruth smiled grimly. Press, regulators, audits, exposure. Musa added, and arrests. Deborah considered it, then nodded slowly. I can do public. Joseph allowed himself a small smile. I know. The next day, Joseph held a press briefing. Deborah stood at his side, visible, unflinching. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. Mr. Ndlovu, are you confirming threats against your life? Yes, Joseph said. And I'm confirming this violence will not silence me, or her, a reporter shouted. Who is she to you? Joseph glanced at Deborah. She met his gaze, steady. She is the reason I'm alive, he said, and the reason I won't be afraid. Deborah felt the weight of the words settle into her bones. Somewhere in the city, Kelechi watched the broadcast lips curling into a thin smile. So he murmured, "You've chosen the light." He reached for his phone. "Let's see how long you last there." The city reacted immediately. By evening, Joseph's name was everywhere on television screens, mounted above roadside shops, on radios crackling in yellow buses, on phones glowing in crowded rooms. The billionaire who refused to hide. The homeless girl who stood beside him. The story grew legs and ran in directions no one could fully control. Deborah felt it first in the stairs. At the estate, staff moved differently around her, more careful, more curious. Some smiled with genuine warmth. Others watched as if she were an equation they didn't understand. Deborah ignored them all, but the weight of visibility pressed hard against her chest. She had survived by being unseen. Now, she was impossible to miss. Joseph noticed the change too. He watched Deborah during dinner, the way she barely touched the food, the way her shoulders tensed whenever a phone buzzed. "You regret it," he said gently. Deborah looked up. "No." He waited. "I just didn't realize how loud safety could be," she admitted. Joseph nodded. "It's exhausting." They shared a small, tired smile. The backlash came swiftly. Joseph's assistant burst into the study the next morning breathless. "Sir, sponsors are calling. Partners are nervous." Joseph didn't look up from the report he was reading. "About what?" "About her," the assistant said, lowering his voice. "They're asking questions." Joseph closed the folder slowly. "Tell them to ask me." When the assistant left, Ruth stepped in arms crossed. "This was always going to happen," she said. "People don't like stories they can't categorize." Deborah stood near the window, pretending not to listen. Ruth continued, "Some think you're manipulating him. Others think he's exploiting you." Deborah turned. "Let them think whatever they want." Ruth studied her. "You're stronger than I thought." Deborah shrugged. "I had to be." Inspector Musa arrived with grim news. "Kalechi has gone quiet," he said. "That usually means planning." Joseph frowned. "What about the man behind him?" Musa sighed. "He's insulating himself. Lawyers, proxies, distance." Deborah spoke up. "Then he'll strike indirectly." Musa nodded. "Exactly." As if summoned by the words, Joseph's phone rang. Ruth glanced at the screen. "Unknown number." Joseph answered. "This is Joseph Ndlovu." A voice crackled through the line, smooth amused. "You should have stayed in your lane." Joseph's expression hardened. "Who is this? Someone who doesn't appreciate humiliation," the voice replied. "And who finds your little performance provocative." Deborah's muscles tightened. "Say what you want to say," Joseph said evenly. A chuckle. "You've built your life on control, Joseph. Contracts, leverage, influence. I wonder how much control you have over her." Joseph's grip tightened on the phone. "Don't." The line went dead. Silence filled the room. Deborah exhaled slowly. "They'll come at me." Joseph met her eyes. "They'll have to go through me." She shook her head. "That's not how this works." That afternoon, Deborah insisted on leaving the estate, publicly, deliberately. Joseph protested, but she stood firm. "If they're watching, let them see." "I won't hide," she said. "And if they move, we'll know." Ruth arranged a low-profile security detail. Musa coordinated from a distance. They went to the market, not the one where Mama Falake worked, but close enough that memories tugged at Deborah's chest. Vendors recognized her now. Some whispered, some smiled. A woman pressed a small bag of groundnuts into Deborah's hands. For courage, she said. Deborah swallowed emotion, catching her off guard. Thank you. Joseph watched it all, seeing the city through new eyes. This was the Lagos Deborah knew, harsh, generous, unforgiving kind. As they turned a corner, Deborah froze. Mama Falake stood ahead, arguing with a uniformed official. Deborah moved instantly. Mama! The old woman's face lit up with relief and fear. They say I can't sell here anymore, she said, voice shaking. Permit issues. Joseph stepped forward. Who said that? The official glanced at him, recognized him, and stiffened. Orders from above. Joseph's jaw set. He turned to Deborah. This is it. Deborah nodded. Indirect. Joseph pulled out his phone, already dialing. Musa. But Deborah raised a hand. Wait. She stepped closer to the official, her voice calm. Who gave the order? The man hesitated. Sweat beaded at his temple. I just follow instructions. Deborah held his gaze. So did I. Once, it almost destroyed me. The man looked away. Joseph finished the call. Inspector Musa will be here in 5 minutes, and the press. The official's confidence evaporated. Mama Falake clutched Deborah's arm. Child, I don't want trouble. Deborah squeezed her hand. Neither do I. But they brought it. The cameras arrived fast. So did the questions. Joseph stood beside Mama Falake's stall voice, steady as he addressed reporters. This woman has sold food here for years. Any attempt to remove her without due process will be investigated. Deborah stood at his side, her presence quiet but resolute. A reporter shouted, Is this about intimidation, Mr. Ndlovu? Yes, Joseph replied. And it won't work. That evening, the permit issue was mysteriously resolved. But the message had been delivered. The counterstrike came at night. Deborah was in the guest room when the lights flickered, then went out entirely. The hum of generators failed. She was on her feet instantly. Joseph, she said into the earpiece. I'm here, he replied. Backup power is down. Stay put. Footsteps echoed in the hall. Deborah moved silently, positioning herself by the door. The handle turned slowly. She struck first, disarming the intruder with a swift twist and pinning him to the wall. Another lunged from behind. She ducked, swept his legs, and slammed him down. But there were more. Joseph's voice cut through her earpiece. Security is compromised. Move to the safe room. Deborah hesitated, then ran. She burst into the safe room as Joseph arrived from the other side, blood on his sleeve. You're hurt, she said. Not badly, he replied. They wanted to scare us. A thud shook the door. Deborah's eyes blazed. They won't. She took a breath, steadying herself. Listen to me. If they get through, follow my lead. Joseph nodded without question. Minutes stretched. Shouts echoed. Then sirens close. The door rattled again, then fell silent. Musa's voice came through the comms. Suspects in custody. House secured. Deborah sagged against the wall, adrenaline draining. Joseph reached out, steadying her. You did good. She met his eyes, something raw and real passing between them. So did you. Later, as dawn approached, they sat on the steps together, wrapped in blankets. I'm tired, Deborah admitted. Not of fighting, of being the reason others get hurt. Joseph considered her words. You're not the reason. You're the mirror. She frowned. For what? For who people choose to be when no one is watching, he said. She looked out at the waking city. What happens when this is over? Joseph followed her gaze. We build something better. Slowly. Deborah didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. In the quiet light of morning, both understood the truth they had been circling. The danger wasn't just outside anymore. It was changing them. The morning after the attack felt heavier than the night itself. Joseph Ndlovu stood at the tall window of his study, watching Lagos wake up beneath a sky still bruised with clouds. Traffic crawled back to life. Vendors arranged their goods. Children in faded uniforms ran toward school laughing, as if fear had not brushed the city hours earlier. Life moved on. Inside the house, however, nothing felt ordinary. Joseph's phone vibrated non-stop on the desk behind him. He didn't turn around. The names didn't matter. Board members, investors, politicians who suddenly remembered his number. Panic disguised as concern. Loyalty tested by danger. Behind him, Deborah sat at the dining table, methodically rewrapping her hand wraps. Each fold was precise practiced. Her face was calm, but her eyes were distant, like someone listening for thunder long before the clouds formed. You should rest, Joseph said quietly. Deborah didn't look up. Rest is when you stop paying attention. Joseph turned to face her. The faint cut on his arm had been cleaned and bandaged, but the memory of her shielding him in the hallway was still sharp. Inspector Ibrahim Musa arrived shortly after rainwater dripping from the brim of his cap. His expression was serious, but not surprised. We arrested 2 men last night, Musa said, settling into a chair. Low level, hired muscle. Joseph exhaled slowly. And the one giving orders, Musa shook his head. Untouched. He's careful. He doesn't show up. He moves people like pieces. Deborah finally looked up. Then stop chasing the pieces. Both men turned to her. Musa raised an eyebrow, meaning Deborah met his gaze steadily. You're treating this like a street war. It's not. It's a message war. Joseph tilted his head slightly. Explain. Deborah leaned back, choosing her words. They don't want you dead yet. If they did, you'd be dead. They want you afraid, distracted, watching your back instead of your front. Musa nodded slowly. Intimidation. Before destruction. Deborah continued. And they're using me because I don't fit your world. Because I make you human. Joseph felt the words land deeper than expected. So what do we do? He asked. Deborah's voice was firm. You stop reacting. You force them to react. Silence followed. Musa broke it. That's risky. Deborah shrugged. So is breathing. Later that day, Joseph convened an emergency board meeting, virtual but visible. Cameras on, no hiding. Deborah watched from the edge of the room as executives appeared on the screen, faces tense. Joseph, one of them began, this situation is becoming problematic. Joseph folded his hands. Violence becomes problematic when we ignore it. I won't. Another executive frowned. Your association with that girl Deborah stiffened. Joseph cut him off. Is not up for discussion. A murmur rippled through the call. Joseph continued calmly. If any of you believe intimidation is a reason to abandon ethics, you are free to resign. Silence fell thick and uncomfortable. After the call ended, Deborah stared at him. You didn't have to do that. Yes, Joseph said, I did. The backlash came swiftly. A gossip blog published an article questioning Deborah's past, hinting at criminal activity suggesting manipulation. Another claimed she was a paid actor. Lies stacked on lies, building a convenient story for those who wanted one. Deborah read the headlines on a tablet Ruth shoved toward her, then handed it back. "I've heard worse," Deborah said flatly. Ruth frowned. "You shouldn't have to." Deborah's jaw tightened. "I grew up being blamed for surviving." "This is familiar." Joseph watched the exchange, anger simmering quietly. "They're trying to isolate you," he said. Deborah nodded. "Then don't let them." That evening, Joseph made another move. He visited a public hospital unannounced. Cameras followed, surprised. Deborah walked beside him, hood pulled low, her presence unmistakable now. Joseph stood before reporters and spoke clearly. "I was attacked. I survived because someone the world ignored chose courage over fear. Anyone who tries to erase that truth will fail." Deborah felt heat rise behind her eyes and hated it. Afterward, in the car, she stared out the window. "You're making me a symbol." Joseph answered honestly. "I'm making you visible." She turned to him. "Visibility gets people killed." Joseph met her gaze. So does silence. They held eye contact, neither backing down. Finally, Deborah looked away. "Just don't turn me into a story you control," she said quietly. "I won't," Joseph replied. "I promise." That promise was tested sooner than expected. Late that night, Deborah received a message on a cheap phone she'd kept hidden. "You think standing in the light protects you? It only makes your shadow bigger." Her blood ran cold. Joseph was in the next room when she entered without knocking. "They know," she said. "Not just about me, about how I think." Joseph didn't ask how. "Then we're close." Deborah shook her head. "Close to what?" "To the truth," he said. She studied him. "And what will that cost?" Joseph didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was steady. "Everything I can afford." Deborah laughed softly without humor. "That's the difference between us." Joseph frowned. "What difference?" "You can afford to lose things," she said. "I learned how to live without them." The words lingered sharp and honest. Near midnight, Inspector Musa called again. "We traced the shell companies Ruth found," he said. "They lead to a consortium tied to port contracts." Joseph's eyes narrowed. "The same consortium I beat 5 years ago." "Yes," Musa confirmed. "And one name keeps appearing, always one step removed." Joseph closed his eyes briefly. "Then this isn't personal." Musa corrected him. "It's very personal. Just not emotional." Deborah listened quietly. Then she spoke. "Men like that don't stop until something breaks." Joseph opened his eyes. "Then we make sure it's not us." Later, as the house settled into uneasy silence, Deborah stood alone on the balcony. The city lights reflected in her eyes like distant fires. Joseph joined her, keeping a respectful distance. "Do you ever wish you hadn't stepped into that alley?" he asked. Deborah thought about it. About hunger. About Mama Falake. About fear. "No," she said. "I wish the world didn't make stepping in so rare." Joseph nodded. They stood there together. Two people from opposite ends of the city, bound now by choice rather than chance. Somewhere far beyond the lights, the man pulling the strings watched the same headlines and smiled. Because the louder Joseph became, the closer the trap was to closing. The warning signs arrived, disguised as silence. Mama Folake's stall did not open that morning. Deborah noticed immediately. She had not gone near the old woman since the market confrontation, but she still counted the days by that stall. The smell of hot oil, the scrape of metal, the soft scolding that passed for love. When noon came and went with no message, no familiar clatter, something inside Deborah tightened. "She always opens," Deborah said quietly, standing in the kitchen with her coat already on. Joseph looked up from his phone. "Did she call, Deborah?" Shook her head. "Mama Falake never calls. She just shows up." Ruth entered, concern etched across her face. "I tried her number. It goes straight to voicemail." Joseph stood. Musa, Inspector Musa, answered on the second ring. "We're checking," he said. "You're not the only one worried." The hours stretched thin. Deborah paced muscles, coiled her mind, assembling patterns she wished weren't familiar. Absence, delay, quiet. These were not accidents. They were preludes. At dusk, Deborah's hidden phone vibrated. A single message appeared, no number attached, just words. "If you want the old woman to breathe tomorrow, come alone." A location pin followed. Deborah's hands went cold. Joseph saw her face change. "What is it?" She swallowed. "They took Mama Falake." Joseph's jaw set. "Send it to Musa." Deborah shook her head. "They said alone." Deborah, Joseph said carefully, "This is exactly what they want." She met his gaze, eyes blazing. "Then they know me well." Joseph reached for her arm. "Listen to me. If you go, they'll kill her if I don't." Deborah cut in. Her voice broke on the last word. She looked away, fighting something deep and raw. "She's the only person who fed me when no one else did." Silence fell heavy. Joseph exhaled slowly. "We won't go alone." Deborah turned back sharply. "You promised." "I promised not to control you," he replied. "I didn't promise to let you be used." She laughed bitterly. "This is my life. I get used or I get buried." Joseph's voice softened. "Not anymore." Deborah stared at him, then shook her head. "I won't risk you. Not for this." Joseph held her gaze. "I'm already at risk because I care." The words landed between them, fragile and dangerous. Deborah closed her eyes. When she opened them, the decision was set. "I'm going," she said. "You can stop me physically, or you can trust me." Joseph knew that look. It was the same one she wore in the alley, in the estate hallway, the look of someone who would rather break than bend. "Let me do this my way," Deborah added quietly. "Please." Joseph turned away, fists clenched. After a long moment, he spoke without looking at her. "I'll give you 10 minutes," he said. "If anything goes wrong, anything, I call Musa, and everyone comes." Deborah nodded. "That's all I need." The location was a warehouse near the docks, abandoned on paper, but very much alive in practice. Deborah approached on foothood, up steps, measured. The air smelled of rust and oil. A single light burned inside. She entered without hesitation. Mama Faleke sat bound to a chair, eyes wide but alive. Relief surged through Deborah, sharp enough to hurt. "Mama," she whispered. The old woman's voice trembled. "Deborah, don't do anything foolish." A slow clap echoed from the shadows. Kelechi stepped forward, smiling like a man enjoying a familiar game. "You came," he said, "alone." Deborah positioned herself between him and Mama Falake. "Let her go." Kelechi chuckled. "Straight to business. I like that." She scanned the space, too open, too staged. She counted exit shadows echoes. What do you want? Deborah demanded. Kelechi tilted his head. You, or rather your silence. Deborah scoffed. I don't know anything. You know how to hurt, he corrected. And you know how to endure. People like Joseph Ndlovu are fragile. People like you are not. Her eyes hardened. Don't talk about him. Kelechi smiled. Ah, there it is. He gestured, and a man brought out a tablet. A video played grainy footage of Deborah years ago. Younger, bloodied hands, a compound. Commands barked in a language she hadn't heard in years. Deborah's breath hitched. Joseph's voice echoed in her mind. Who taught you that? Kelechi leaned closer. You ran from a program that trains weapons. We found the records. You think men forget investments? Like that? Deborah's fists clenched. I'm not theirs. No, Kelechi agreed softly. You're better. He straightened. Here's the deal. You disappear. Publicly. No interviews. No standing beside billionaires. You vanish, and the old woman goes free. Deborah glanced at Mama Falake, tears streaking the old woman's cheeks. And if I refuse? Deborah asked. Kelechi shrugged. Then Joseph loses you, and you lose her. Deborah's chest tightened. This was the choice she had always feared: visibility versus survival. Hers versus someone else's. I'll do it, she said. Mama Falake cried out. No, Deborah turned. I'll be fine, she lied. I always am. Kelechi smiled in satisfaction. Smart girl. A sudden crash shattered the moment. The warehouse doors burst open. Shouts, footsteps. Joseph's voice cut through the chaos. Deborah, Kelechi cursed. You lied. Deborah spun, fury blazing. I warned you. Gunfire cracked, controlled, precise. Inspector Musa's team flooded the space. Men scattered. Joseph ran straight to Deborah, ignoring the danger. Are you hurt? She stared at him, torn between relief and rage. You broke your promise. I broke a rule, he replied. Not my word. Kelechi tried to flee. Deborah moved on instinct, intercepting him with a strike that sent him sprawling. She stood over him, breathing hard. Musa cuffed Kelechi swiftly. It's over. Deborah didn't answer. She rushed to Mama Falake, cutting the ropes, holding her as she sobbed. Joseph watched, heart-pounding, as understanding clicked into place. The past, the training, the scars. The reason Deborah fought like survival was a language. Later outside, as sirens faded and Mama Falake was taken to safety, Joseph turned to Deborah. You were trained, he said gently. Weren't you? Deborah nodded once, exhausted. I escaped. Joseph swallowed. You don't have to disappear. Deborah looked at him, eyes wet and fierce. They won't stop. Joseph stepped closer. Then neither will I. They stood amid flashing lights and cold air, both knowing the line had been crossed. The enemy had shown their hand, and the game had changed. The docks fell quiet after the sirens faded, leaving behind the smell of oil and wet concrete. Deborah sat on the edge of an ambulance, arms wrapped around herself as a medic checked the bruises on her ribs. Mama Falak had already been taken to the hospital, shaken but alive. That fact alone kept Deborah breathing steadily. Barely. Joseph stood a few steps away, arguing in low tones with Inspector Musa. You had no right to come in like that, Musa said. You compromised the perimeter. Joseph didn't flinch. I wasn't going to watch her walk into a trap alone. Musa's eyes flicked to Deborah. You both almost died. Joseph lowered his voice. Almost isn't enough. Musa exhaled sharply, then nodded toward the warehouse. Kelechi is talking, not because he's afraid of prison, but because he's afraid of the people who trained her. Deborah's head snapped up. What Musa met her gaze. Your past isn't buried as deep as you thought. The medic finished and stepped away. Deborah slid off the ambulance, her body sore, but her mind burning. What did he say? She demanded. Musa hesitated, then spoke plainly. There's a private security consortium operating under government contracts. Off-the-books training facilities. They recruit children from unstable regions. Train them young, hard. Joseph felt a chill crawl up his spine. They consider you lost property, Musa continued, and a liability. Deborah laughed, softly bitter. Figures. Joseph turned to her. You never told me. She met his eyes. I never wanted to be that person again. The next 48 hours moved fast. Musa's team raided 2 shell offices. Ruth froze accounts connected to the consortium's logistics arm. Journalists began sniffing around a story too dangerous to publish without airtight proof. And proof was exactly what Joseph decided to get. He sat across from Deborah in the study, the lights low, the city humming beyond the windows. I need you to tell me everything, he said gently. Not for the press, for us. Deborah stared at the floor for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was steady but distant. They called it discipline, she said. They took kids no one would miss. Trained us to obey, to fight, to endure pain until it stopped meaning anything. Joseph's chest tightened. I was good, Deborah continued. That's why I survived. That's why they invested in me. And how did you escape? Joseph asked quietly. I stopped believing them, she replied. I ran during a transfer, got hurt, hid. The streets finished what they started, but they didn't own me. Joseph reached across the table, resting his hand near hers without touching. They don't own you now. Deborah finally looked up. They'll try to prove it. They did. That night, Joseph received a message routed through 3 servers. Bring the girl, or we bring the truth. Attached was a document, partial footage carefully edited. Deborah as a teenager, fighting, breaking bones, no context, no coercion. Joseph's jaw clenched. Blackmail. Deborah's face went pale. They'll paint me as a criminal. Joseph closed the laptop. Then we beat them to the truth. Deborah shook her head. You can't win against a system like that. Joseph stood. I built my life beating systems that thought they were untouchable. He turned to her. But I need your consent. She searched his face, fear warring with resolve. What's the plan? We expose them, Joseph said, fully. Public inquiry, international pressure. We don't run, we testify. Deborah laughed softly. You think they'll let me live long enough to testify? Joseph's eyes were steady. I won't let them get close enough. The ambush came sooner than expected. They were driving back from a secure meeting when the convoy slowed unexpectedly. Construction barriers blocked the road. Too neat, too fast. Deborah felt it instantly. Joseph's gunfire shattered the windshield. The driver swerved. Security vehicles fanned out. Deborah ducked, heart pounding as bullets tore through metal. Get us out, Joseph shouted. The car spun, slammed into a barrier, and stopped hard. Smoke filled the cabin. Deborah was moving before the car settled. She kicked the door open, dragging Joseph with her, as another vehicle screeched to a halt nearby. Men poured out, trained, coordinated. Stay behind me, Deborah ordered. Joseph shook his head. We moved together. They ran, using the wreckage for cover. Deborah fought, with brutal efficiency, disarming, disabling, never lingering. Joseph stayed close, shielding her blind side, trusting her instincts completely. A man lunged toward Joseph from the left. Deborah intercepted him mid-stride, sending him crashing to the ground. She felt something tear in her shoulder but ignored it. They reached a drainage culvert and dropped inside water soaking their clothes. Sirens wailed in the distance too far. Deborah leaned against the concrete, breathing hard. They won't stop. Joseph wiped blood from his brow. Neither will we. Footsteps echoed above. Deborah tensed. Then Inspector Moose's voice rang out. Police, drop your weapons. Relief hit like a wave. Minutes later, the attackers were in cuffs, their confidence replaced with silence. Musa approached grim. We caught one alive. He confirmed it. They were sent to take Deborah. Alive. Joseph looked at Deborah, anger and fear colliding. You see, this ends now. Deborah closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. Okay, she said. We testify. The days that followed were a storm. Deborah sat before investigators' cameras, rolling, telling her story in full for the first time. Joseph sat beside her, unwavering. Documents leaked, whistleblowers emerged. International agencies took interest. The consortium scrambled. Threats poured in, smears multiplied, but the truth moved faster. One evening, after a long day of testimony, Deborah stood alone on the balcony, city lights shimmering below. Joseph joined her silent. Do you regret it? He asked. She shook her head. I regret staying silent for so long. He nodded. You're brave. She smiled faintly. I'm tired. Joseph placed a jacket over her shoulders. Then rest. I'll keep watch. She leaned against the railing, finally allowing herself to believe something impossible. That maybe, just maybe, the fight was turning. And that the strength she once used only to survive could now be used to end the thing that created her. The first arrest made the morning news. By noon, the second followed. By evening, the word collapse began appearing in headlines, first cautiously, then boldly. The private security consortium that had operated for years behind contracts and shadows was unraveling thread by thread. Offices were sealed, accounts frozen. Names whispered with fear were now spoken aloud. Deborah watched it happen from a small conference room inside the investigative complex, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of tea she hadn't touched. Screens along the wall played rolling coverage analysts, arguing anchors, interrupting images of men she half recognized being escorted into black vans. Joseph stood near the door, speaking quietly into his phone. Yes, he said. Full cooperation. Every document. He ended the call and turned to Deborah. They're asking for you, she nodded, setting the cup down untouched. I'm ready. Inspector Musa led her into the main chamber, where a panel of investigators waited, local, international, stern faces, carrying the weight of decades of buried crimes. Deborah took a seat. Cameras rolled. State your name for the record, a woman at the center said. Deborah Akinwale. Deborah replied steadily. And your relationship to the accused organizations? Deborah inhaled slowly. I was recruited as a child, trained without consent, used, then hunted when I refused to remain silent. The room shifted. She spoke for hours, not dramatically, not with anger, just truth, clear, relentless. Names, places, patterns. The methods used to break children and rebuild them into tools. The quiet ways those tools were disposed of when they learned to think. Joseph watched from behind the glass, his chest tight. Every sentence carried a cost he wished he could pay for her. When Deborah finally stepped out, her legs trembled. Joseph was there, instantly steadying her. "You did it." She shook her head. "I started it." The retaliation was swift and desperate. That night, an anonymous video dropped online, edited, distorted. Clips of Deborah's training spliced with ominous music and misleading captions. "Violent past exposed. Is the billionaire's hero a threat?" The comments exploded. Deborah didn't look at them. Joseph did, and felt his stomach knot. "They're trying to discredit you," Ruth said grimly. "Classic." Joseph's jaw hardened. "Then we counter." "How?" Deborah asked quietly. Joseph looked at her. "By telling the rest of the truth." The press conference was scheduled for sunrise. Joseph stood at the podium, the room packed beyond capacity. Deborah sat to his right, Inspector Musa to his left. Joseph spoke first. For years, power hid behind legality. Contracts were used as shields. Children were turned into assets, and then erased. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Joseph continued. "The woman beside me survived that system, and instead of hiding, she chose to expose it at great personal cost." Deborah took the microphone next. "I did things I was trained to do," she said calmly. "I was taught to survive by hurting others. What they never taught me was how to stop." The room fell silent. "I am not proud of my past," Deborah continued, "but I am responsible for my future, and for the children who are still trapped in systems like this." She stepped back. The questions came fast. "Do you deny the footage?" "No," Deborah replied. "Were you violent?" "Yes, when I was forced to be." "And now?" Deborah met the reporter's gaze. "Now I fight so no one else has to become what I was." The conference ended without applause. It didn't need any. The arrests multiplied. Whistleblowers poured in. Contracts were terminated. Government officials scrambled to distance themselves. Some succeeded. Some didn't. One name surfaced again and again, the financier Joseph had suspected from the beginning. Evidence stacked high. Warrants were issued. He was arrested at a private airstrip 2 days later. Deborah watched the footage once, then turned it off. "It's done," Joseph said softly. Deborah exhaled a long breath she'd been holding for years. "No, but it's enough." The trial moved faster than anyone expected. Public pressure left little room for delay. Testimonies piled up. Survivors came forward, some trembling, some furious, all finally heard. Deborah testified again this time, not as a witness of violence, but as proof of survival. The verdict came on a humid afternoon. Guilty on all major counts. Joseph felt his knees weaken as the words echoed through the courtroom. Deborah closed her eyes, tears slipping free without sound. Mama Falake squeezed her hand. "You see," the old woman whispered, "you broke the chain." Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, some cheering, some simply watching history happen. Joseph shielded Deborah as they stepped into the sunlight. A reporter shouted Deborah, "What's next for you?" She paused. For the first time, she said slowly, "I don't know." "And that feels like freedom." Joseph glanced at her, pride and concern mixing. "You don't have to decide today," she nodded. "I won't." That evening, they returned to the estate quietly. No cameras, no speeches. Deborah sat on the steps, staring at the sky as it shifted from gold to indigo. Joseph joined her. You saved a lot of people. She shrugged. I just stopped running. He hesitated, then spoke. You don't have to stay. She looked at him surprised. You want me to go? I want you to choose, he said. Not because you're hunted, not because you're protected, because it's what you want. Deborah thought of the streets, of fear, of Mama Falake's stall, of the training that still lived in her muscles. Then she thought of mornings without running. I want to build something, she said slowly. Not here exactly, but with purpose. Joseph smiled faintly. Then let's build it. She studied him. Together. If you'll have me, he replied. Deborah nodded. I think I will. In the quiet that followed, neither of them noticed the city exhale, relieved, wary, hopeful. The story that began in an alley had reached its reckoning, and the future, unwritten, waited. The silence after victory was unfamiliar. Deborah felt it most in the mornings when she woke without alarms, without fear pounding first into her chest. The estate no longer felt like a bunker. It felt like a place waiting to be defined. She stood by the window one morning, watching the city breathe below. Lagos was the same loud, chaotic, stubbornly alive. And yet something in her had shifted. The constant readiness to flee had dulled, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Joseph noticed. You're thinking again, he said, handing her a cup of tea. She accepted it with a small smile. I always think. I just don't always admit it. They sat together in the quiet living room, sunlight spilling across the floor. News continued to roll in. Sentences were handed down. More victims came forward. International bodies announced reforms, task forces, audits. Words like accountability and oversight were repeated so often they almost lost meaning. Almost. Ruth entered with her tablet. The board approved the restructuring, she said. No more private security contracts without independent review. Joseph nodded. Good. Ruth glanced at Deborah. There's something else. Deborah stiffened slightly. What? Ruth hesitated. There's attention from donors, NGOs, survivors groups. They want to talk to you. Deborah exhaled solely. I didn't do this to become a symbol. Joseph met her eyes. You don't have to be one, but you can be useful. She raised an eyebrow. That's a strange compliment. He smiled. I mean it the right way. The invitation arrived 2 days later. A survivors collective based in Accra wanted Deborah to speak privately, no press. Just a room full of people who had lived through versions of what she had escaped. Deborah stared at the email for a long time. I don't know how to talk to them, she admitted. Joseph leaned against the counter. You already have, by telling the truth. She shook her head. That was different. That was fighting. Joseph considered that. Then don't speak as a fighter. Speak as someone who survived and chose something else. Deborah looked at him surprised. You make it sound easy. It's not, he said, but it's yours. The meeting room in Accra was modest plastic chairs, a long wooden table, windows open to the heat. No cameras, no microphones. Deborah sat among them, not at the front. One by one, people spoke. Men and women. Some older than her, some younger. Stories overlapped recruitment coercion, silence escape. Deborah listened. When it was her turn, she didn't stand. She didn't rehearse. I don't know how to fix what was done to us, she said quietly. I only know that silence helped them. And truth even when it hurts, helped me. A woman across the table began to cry. A man nodded slowly. Deborah continued, I was trained to fight, but what saved me was choosing not to be what they made me. When she finished, no one applauded. They simply stayed. Later, as Deborah stepped outside into the thick afternoon air, her hands trembled not from fear, but release. Joseph waited a respectful distance away. How was it? Deborah smiled, tired and real, hard and right. Back in Lagos, plans began to take shape. Not a foundation yet, not a brand, just a space. A training center stripped of cruelty, counseling rooms, legal aid, skills workshops. Somewhere survivors could come without being turned into stories. Joseph offered funding. Deborah hesitated. I don't want this to be yours. Joseph nodded immediately. Then it won't be. Ruth helped draft structures that ensured independence. Musa offered quiet protection. Mama Falake volunteered to cook, insisting loudly that healing required food. Construction began on a modest building near the outskirts of the city. Deborah visited often, sleeves rolled up, arguing over paint colors and window placement. Joseph watched from the sidelines, proud and careful not to intrude. The backlash never fully disappeared. Online voices questioned Deborah's motives. Some accused Joseph of image laundering. Others tried to revive old footage. This time, Deborah didn't flinch. They can talk, she said. I'm busy. Joseph smiled at that. One evening, as they reviewed plans together, Deborah paused. There's something I need to say, she said. Joseph set the papers down. I'm listening. I don't want to be protected anymore, Deborah said carefully. I want partnership. If we do this, whatever this is, I need to stand on my own feet. Joseph considered her words. Then I'll stand beside you. Not in front, not behind. She searched his face. Found no resistance. Good, she said softly. The opening day came quietly. No press, no speeches. Just people arriving, hesitant, curious, hopeful. Deborah stood at the door, welcoming them one by one. Joseph watched her move through the space she had imagined into being. There was strength there, yes, sis, but also gentleness he hadn't seen before. As the sun dipped low, Deborah stepped outside, wiping her hands on her jeans. Joseph joined her. You did this. She shook her head. We did. He didn't argue. They stood together in the fading light. Joseph Deborah said after a moment, what happens when the noise fades? He thought about it. Then we listen to what remains. She smiled. I like that. That night, Deborah lay awake, not from fear, but from possibility. For the first time, tomorrow wasn't a threat. It was a question, and she was finally ready to answer it. The morning air was cool when Deborah woke. Not cold, not sharp, just cool enough to remind her she was alive and safe. She lay still for a moment, listening to the unfamiliar sound of calm. No sirens, no shouting, no urgency dragging her out of sleep. For years, peace had felt like a trick, something that vanished the moment you trusted it. Today, it stayed. Deborah rose and dressed simply. Jeans, a plain shirt, her hair tied back. She left the hand wraps on the table, not because she was weak, but because she didn't need them today. Outside, the city was already awake. At the center, they had built people were arriving early. Survivors, mothers, young men with guarded eyes, girls who looked far too alert for their age. Deborah greeted each one, learning names, offering tea, listening more than she spoke. Mama Falake stood by the cooking pots, barking orders happily. "You can't heal an empty stomach," she declared. Deborah laughed, a sound that still surprised her when it came out easily. Joseph arrived later quietly, without ceremony. No suit, no entourage, just him. He paused at the entrance, watching Deborah from a distance as she helped a young boy adjust a chair, as she knelt to speak to a woman whose hands shook just like hers once had. Ruth came to stand beside him. "She's found her place," Ruth said. Joseph nodded. "She built it." Midday brought an unexpected visitor. Inspector Musa arrived hat in hand, his expression thoughtful rather than tense. "I wanted to see it for myself," he said, glancing around. "What came out of all this?" Deborah gestured to the room. "This," Musa nodded slowly. "You know, not many people walk out of violence without becoming it." Deborah met his gaze. "I almost did." "But you didn't," Musa said. "That matters." Before leaving, he paused. "For what it's worth, your testimony is already changing policy, quietly, the right way." Deborah absorbed that in silence. In the afternoon, Deborah finally stepped away. She walked alone to the edge of the compound where the noise softened and the city stretched wide and imperfect. Joseph followed at a respectful distance, stopping when she did. "I've been thinking," Deborah said. "That sounds dangerous," Joseph replied lightly. She smiled, then grew serious. "About choice. About what comes next." Joseph waited. "I don't want my life to be a reaction anymore," she continued. "Not to them, not to fear, not even to gratitude." Joseph nodded. "Then don't let it be." She turned to him. "This thing between us, it started in violence, in survival." "Yes," he said, "but it didn't stay there." Deborah studied his face, the man who had been beaten in an alley, the man who could have walked away from her story and chosen comfort. "I don't need saving," she said quietly. "I know," Joseph replied. "That's why I'm here." The words settled between them, honest and unforced. Deborah exhaled. "I want to choose you, not because you protected me, but because you saw me." Joseph felt his chest tighten. "Then I choose you, not as someone I rescued, but as someone I respect." No grand gesture followed, no kiss timed for effect. Just two people standing in the open, letting the truth breathe. As evening fell, the center grew quieter. People drifted home. Laughter echoed faintly from the kitchen as Mama Falake packed leftovers into containers no one had asked for. Deborah locked the door last. Joseph waited beside her. "Tired." "Yes," she said, "but the good kind." They walked together toward the car, not rushing. "You know," Deborah said thoughtfully, "I used to think strength was how hard you could hit." Joseph glanced at her. "And now I think it's how much of yourself you can give without disappearing." He smiled. "That's expensive strength." She laughed softly. "Worth it." Later that night, Deborah stood on the balcony once more. The city lights shimmered like 1,000 second chances. Joseph joined her, draping a light jacket over her shoulders. She didn't flinch this time. She leaned into it. "Do you think the world really changes?" she asked. Joseph considered the question. "Not all at once." But people do. And that's how it starts. She nodded. I used to believe people were either predators or prey. And now, he asked. And now, she said, I think we get to decide who we become, especially after the worst has happened. Joseph watched her, humbled by the journey that had brought her here. The story that began in an alley ended not with revenge, but with rebuilding. A girl the world tried to erase chose to be seen on her own terms. A man who had everything learned what mattered, and a city bruised but breathing watched as pain turned quietly into purpose. Life would go on. There would be challenges, doubt, days when the past knocked hard. But Deborah Akinwale was no longer running. She was walking forward by choice. And sometimes that is the bravest fight of all. In life, strength often arrives wearing the wrong face. We are taught to admire power, wealth, control, but the deepest strength is usually quieter. It shows up in people who have every reason to break, yet choose to rebuild. In those who could respond with hatred, but instead respond with purpose. Deborah's story reminds us that our past does not define our value. What happened to you may shape you, but it does not own you. You are not your worst moment. You are the choices you make after it. Joseph's journey teaches another truth. Real power is not about saving others to feel important. It's about standing beside them, listening, and allowing them to rise on their own. Kindness creates ripples we may never see. Silence can protect evil, but courage, even imperfect courage, can expose it. And hope doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, when we decide not to run anymore. So, here's the question for you. If you had the chance to rewrite one chapter of your life, not by erasing the pain, but by choosing a new ending, would you take it? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories of resilience, humanity, and second chances speak to you, please subscribe to the channel and walk this journey with us.